Derrick Henry, DeVonta Smith, and Dak Prescott are among the safest players to draft at their current cost. We discuss which safe players we want to have on our fantasy rosters on today's episode of Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. I want to welcome in all of our new listeners, give you a nice warm welcome as you're here, hopefully to prepare for 2024 fantasy drafts. We're so excited to help you, draft your best team. And then once we get into the season, we can help with any start sit questions and decisions, trade offers, waiver wire moves, and let's go get you your fantasy football championships. For those of you who are new, I'm one of your co-hosts, Michelle Magdziuk, and when I'm not doing this, I'm a researcher and fantasy analyst with NFL Network.
Yeah, welcome again. I'm your other co-host, Vinnie Iyer. When I'm not doing this, I'm covering NFL, fantasy, betting, and a lot more for sportingnews.com, getting you ready to dominate your drafts all August long.
On yesterday's episode, we hit on all the riskiest players to draft. We did top 3 at each position. If you missed that, go listen to that episode after you listen to this one. Today, we're going to hit on the safest draft picks this season. We'll talk about 3 of the safest running backs and wide receivers, and then 2 of the safest quarterbacks and tight ends. Before we start, I want to remind everyone today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. The NFL is back. The MLB is in full swing. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. All right, let's start with running backs because I think running backs is a more interesting position when it comes to the safer players. And it's so weird to say Derrick Henry, who is 30 years old and on a new team, is one of the safest players you can draft this year, but he's going as running back 9 late in the second round. He finishes the running back 8 last year on a terrible Titans offense. He was a running back 3 in fantasy points per game in 2022. He was a running back 1 in 2021. Running back 9 cost. I don't care about his age. I love the new team he's on. He's so safe in my mind to take as your RB1 on your team.
Yeah, I never thought I would say this either about an aging running back, but he's an aging running back that's one for the ages. I mean, he's like Adrian Peterson in terms of just pure power, explosiveness, strength, and just keeps himself in tremendous shape. And I think what's helping him now is he doesn't have that volume that was kind of wasted in the passing game, where still, if you get touches in the passing game and you get hit quite a bit, that counts. That can rack up on your mileage. Now, Derrick Henry has been used in a very specific way. He has made some plays when needed in the passing game, but he's a power back. And he's on a team where Gus Edwards scored double-digit touchdowns playing off Lamar Jackson. This offense is fantastic. I think it's only going to get better with Todd Monken and Jackson working together in year 2. This was the top rushing offense from last year. There are no variables here. In fact, this offensive line should be better. There should be better feel and chemistry of Lamar Jackson operating this offense. Derrick Henry cleans up this mess. We've seen a lot of teams do this offseason, like the Eagles we talked about. Just a little bit riskier with Saquon Barkley, but there's nothing risky about Derrick Henry. He's going to get pounded between the tackles. He's going to score double-digit touchdowns. I think of all the players in fantasy that isn't a quarterback, this is the person I feel the best is going to score double-digit touchdowns, almost guaranteed this season. So he's going to have 10 to 15 touchdowns. He's going to have 1,300, 1,400 yards rushing. What else do you need from Derrick Henry? He's probably going to make a few big plays in the passing game as well. But this team should score a ton, and Derrick Henry is going to be a centerpiece of it.
Yeah, you're so right on the double-digit touchdowns. Henry has scored 10-plus rushing touchdowns in 6 straight seasons. That is the 3rd longest such streak in NFL history. He has 27 more rushing touchdowns than any other player since 2018. Like what we talked about yesterday, Saquon Barkley is one of the riskiest picks in drafts. He's going as RB5, 11th overall. Derrick Henry at RB9, 19th overall. Like I feel like those 2 draft costs should be switched. So super safe for Derrick Henry here. Another oldie I guess we're going with old men today. Alvin Kamara. I call them old men. They're younger than I am, I think. I'm 32. So, yeah, they're both younger than I am. But Alvin Kamara, running back 17 cost, 4th round. He finishes the running back 5 in points per game last year in half PPR. Now, it's not like he did it with efficiency or prettiness. Like, it wasn't pretty when he touched the ball. But like he got it done because he's a huge part of this offense, not only as a rusher, but also in targets. He had the 2nd most targets on the Saints last year and didn't even play 4 games. He had the 2nd most targets among running backs and again, didn't play 4 games. He did average the most targets per game among running backs last season. And Kendre Miller, who we thought maybe could take a step forward this year, he's already hurt again. I'm not worried about Jamal Williams. And like, it's not even like Kamara was killing it with touchdowns, and that's why he finishes running back 5. He really didn't get the ball into the end zone all that much last year. Only had 5 rushing touchdowns, 1 receiving. He's super. He's super.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't think that we were going to go here either. I mean, given last year we were down on him, but maybe that's why that he still came through after he was suspended and he came back and played. He was very productive, and he had those cheapy checkdowns that he got by with a lot with Derek Carr. They expanded the offense a little bit, but you're right. I mean, the competition is sparse. He's still what they want to do offensively. They have a new coordinator there, Clint Kubiak, so he's going to probably use Kamara in a variety of roles here. I mean, a little bit of 49ers influence. So if you say who's going to be in the Hall of Fame from like the recent contemporary running backs, Derrick Henry is definitely in there. Christian McCaffrey is headed there if he has 1 or 2 more seasons. But Alvin Kamara is slowly creeping into that mix, right? If he keeps producing, he's still got some years on him to produce. I think we wanted to write him off. And the other thing that we were looking for is whether the Saints going to cut him and move on. Well, no, they realized he was important to their offense. They need him quite a bit. And also there's a lot of question marks at the receiving corps. I mean, they got to figure out things after Rashid Shaheed and Chris Olave. Where are they going for? Are they going to Cedric Wilson? Where are they going to throw the ball? So Kamara's going to see a lot of balls. It's not like tight end Juwan Johnson is very consistent here either. So Kamara has a good chance to lead this team in receptions after Olave, and then also lead this team in rushing touchdowns. So that combination says, yeah, I'm on board with Alvin Kamara, especially at that cost to be RB17. He's probably going to finish in the top 12, 15.
Yeah, right around where he's going. There's 4 running backs going pretty close to each other. Joe Mixon, Kenneth Walker, Alvin Kamara, and Aaron Jones. Kamara's so much safer out of those guys. I think he has just as much upside as any of those guys, probably more. So yeah, just so safe. Now the last safest running back we're going to go with is Rashad White, which again, at the beginning of this offseason, there's no way we thought we were going to say his name as the safest draft pick. But he's going as RB13. You can get him in the 3rd round. He finished as the RB6 overall last year. Now I did play 17 games. So like his overall efficiency, it wasn't as dominant finishes, or he was a running back 14 in fantasy points per game last year, but we saw that get much better in the second half of the year. He started slow, was a running back 8 in points per game from week 7 through 18. His target share was there, right? There was no, his target share and his carries. There was no running back that had more scrimmage touches than Rashad White last year. I said no running back. There was one. It was Christian McCaffrey. He had 3 more scrimmage touches. That's the only running back that had more touches than Rashad White. And, also he did all of this. He finished as a running back 6 overall with only 9 touchdowns scored last year. Like that's very, very repeatable. And the Buccaneers added they added Bucky Irving, but no real competition for Rashad White in terms of like starter role this year. He's also a very safe pick.
Yeah, Bucky Irving has some qualities that could eat into Rashad White a little bit with the pass catching, but he's kind of redundant to Chase Edmonds, who was behind him last year for much of it and really wasn't on the field. So Rashad White has had 0 competition in his backfield. We want to see a guy who's going to dominate touches. I also thought, remember early in the season, it seemed like this is just based on him catching balls. He's just kind of inflated. He's kind of an overrated type player. We both were looking at that. I did like Rashad White a lot last year. We're a little skeptical. But then when he got the confidence and the touches and the blocking started to come together, he started to look a little bit better as a runner. It was a very inefficient running game, but different style of offense here with Liam Cohen. That might help him as well, who has some connection to the Rams. They've always had a decent, just straight-up running game when they wanted it. So I think Rashad White's in really good shape here, and he's going to be a key part of this passing game. Keep in mind, there's not much here. Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Kate Otten, there's not much else there. They're still trying to figure out the third receiver. So Rashad White is in deep into this offense. He's basically a better, younger version of what Leonard Fournette was for this team going forward, and a guy that they can kind of feature for many years to come.
Absolutely. Now, in our wide receivers, our top 3 safest wide receivers, we're going to hop into them in our next segment here. The one key skill set that these 3 guys have is great route running. I just found that interesting. We feel really safe with them because we know they can get open, right? It doesn't matter so much the scheme or the quarterback play. They're going to be able to get open. So we're going to hit on those 3 wide receivers right after we hear from one of our sponsors.
This episode of Locked On Fantasy Football, as we said at the top, is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. And with FanDuel, you always feel like you're in the game. It doesn't matter if there are no games going on in terms of counting in the NFL or college football. We've had a lot of action. We've had many things go on in this offseason. We've had a lot of great MLB games. We had the NBA and NHL playoffs. We had the Olympics. Well, if you love sports as much as I do and you need to get in on the action and we don't want them to stop, they never stop at FanDuel.com. I mean, you can just find anything that you could bet on there at FanDuel and get through and find that action, even when they're not football games. All you have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime you're in the mood, and you can find something for you all the time, all year round, no matter what sport is going on. And this summer, it's a great time to get in on FanDuel because FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a booster bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Still one more month here as we head toward NFL kickoff. You want to get in on FanDuel right before that. So you're on board for the whole season. So check it out. Go to FanDuel.com. FanDuel.com, while you're waiting for the NFL, it's the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Again, FanDuel.com. Get in on the action now. All right, time to look at those route running safe dudes here in our drafts. And they're all going in the wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 borderline range. That means top 24, just outside of it. So let's start with a guy who is underrated, maybe even in relation to his teammate a little bit. That's DeVonta Smith of the Eagles, Michelle. Right now, wide receiver 23. He's going in the late 4th round, early 5th round drafts.
Yeah, I mean, last year he finished as a wide receiver 22 in fantasy points per game, wide receiver 16 in 2022, right? So it's not like he's been massively outproducing this wide receiver 23 cost. But even last year, he still did outproduce that cost. And it was a year where the Eagles really struggled just as a team in the second half of the year. It's a year he saw his targets go like a solid chunk of his targets taken away from the 2022 season. And it was just kind of a mess on offense altogether. And I expect things to get better for DeVonta Smith and this entire Eagles offense. But also one thing that we know Kellen Moore loves is him some slot wide receivers, right? And I think AJ Brown will play some slot role, but so will DeVonta Smith. We saw, them always use Kellen Moore use Keenan Allen in the slot with the Chargers. CeeDee Lamb played so much in the slot when Kellen Moore was the OC for the Cowboys. And both the Chargers and the Cowboys ranked very heavily in pass attempts under Kellen Moore. So I expect this to be a heavier passing offense than we're used to. I expect DeVonta Smith to be used all over the field. And if last year in this disastrous offense, he still finished as a wide receiver 22 in fantasy points per game, I think that makes him incredibly safe at wide receiver 23 cost, while he also has upside to be a top 15 fantasy wide receiver this year.
Yeah, it was a very tough post-Shane Steichen, pre-Kellen Moore season. They just could not figure out what they want to do identity-wise, and they had this crisis as well, which there's Nick Sirianni early. They were a run-heavy team, then a pass-heavy team. Like the very first year he was the head coach. They could not figure out their identity. Well, maybe the answer is a little bit of both. Pass to score, run to win. That's kind of the old-school mentality. That means just trying to get those points up and make some big plays in the passing game. Then in the second half, you run, pound the ball away, get your yards there when you're working with the lead. So that's a very old school approach, but Kellen Moore is also a new school offensive coordinator. And Michelle is right. He appreciates route runners the way that Allen and Lamb execute. Smith is just such a technician all over the field. He's going to get open all the time. You'll see A.J. Brown continue to get double teamed because he's the big play guy that can stretch the field and end people's hopes and dreams defensively on one play. And DeVonta Smith is more work it in the middle of the field, but we also saw him stretch the field. So this is going to be a bold prediction, but it would not shock me at all if DeVonta Smith was the better, more productive all-around receiver for the Eagles than A.J. Brown this season. I just think it can happen with the volume, and I'm talking in half and full point PPR, where you get a little bit of credit for the volume. A.J. Brown is not necessarily a volume receiver. He's a bit helped by his touchdowns and big plays. Well, Smith can make big plays. I think he'll get a few more touchdowns in this offense as well. So, again, I would not be surprised at all. And that says at wide receiver 23, well behind Brown, he's a very good cost and very safe.
Yeah, I wouldn't go as wild to say maybe he'll be more consistent than A.J. Brown, but I will say the 4 wide receivers going ahead of DeVonta Smith in drafts, Stephon Diggs, DK Metcalf, Cooper Kupp, DJ Moore. I would much prefer and feel safer with DeVonta Smith there, especially if he's my wide receiver 2 on my team. Now, Amari Cooper, he's our second safest wide receiver of the draft this year. We've talked a ton about him, but he's going as wide receiver 25, 5th round pick. I've talked a lot about Amari Cooper, right? But just to remind everybody, especially if you're new here, he was the wide receiver 17 in fantasy points per game in both last season and in the 2022 season. So both seasons he's been with the Browns, and that hasn't been with good quarterback play. That hasn't been in good offenses. And now all of a sudden he's dropping down the quarterback 25 cost. I think people are getting too worried. I don't know, about Deshaun Watson, maybe in his play, but in the 5 games he did play with Deshaun Watson, excluding week 7, because Watson had 1 completion in that game. But in the 5 games he actually played with Watson, Cooper averaged 96 receiving yards per game and 17.6 fantasy points per game. That was the same amount of fantasy points per game as Puka Nacua scored last year, who's a wide receiver 6 on the season. I love that they added Ken Dorsey as their OC. We know Dorsey hyper-targeted Stephon Diggs when he was the Bills offensive coordinator. Amari Cooper is the number 1 guy here, and I just think wide receiver 25 is just so safe there because we know he's at least going to be a top 20 wide receiver.
Yeah, Amari Cooper might be one of the safest wide receiver picks in general, right, throughout his career. I mean, he's got it done with different people, different places. I mean, he's had an interesting career for being such a productive receiver and getting a lot of contracts with the Raiders, Cowboys, and now the Browns. Yeah, he's just the guy that gets open, and they sometimes forget about how good he is. He just finds a way to get open, and whatever quarterback, we saw Joe Flacco really got him going. I wish there were some games like this with Deshaun Watson. Let's get him a 200-yard game with Deshaun Watson. I think it can happen, right? I mean, this guy showed you what he can do. Like, if you give him enough volume, he's going to come through big time. And why wouldn't you give him volume? We got a lot of question marks about the second wide receiver. David Njoku might be needed more for blocking. Your offense is going to be pass happier with Ken Dorsey. You don't have the same running reliability without Nick Chubb. So everything points to throw the ball to Amari Cooper home and away. Stop doing this great at home, shaky away splits with him. That's over. I think Amari Cooper has to be great all around, complete receiver. And I think you're sneakily going to see some high-scoring games in the AFC North. This used to be a black and blue division, but I think with the Ravens and Bengals and the quarterback situation improving with the Steelers, you're going to have some games where teams are going to put it up in the air. It's not going to be very kind of conservative. So I love Amari Cooper for all those reasons and just the talent alone. I mean, he's going to be one of the more, I think, underappreciated receivers of this year.
This is like the first year I've been all in on Amari Cooper, and yeah, he's going to be on all of my teams because he's super safe, and I think he has top 12 upside this year. Now, the safest guy that you can get later on, that's not a fun pick at all. It's pretty boring. It's Christian Kirk. He's going as wide receiver 31. You can get him in the 7th round a lot of the time in drafts, maybe late 6th if you want to make sure you get him. But like last year, it was kind of a throwaway year, but he did have some really solid games in there as well. He led the team in receiving yards from weeks 1 through 13 prior to his season-ending core muscle injury. That was with Calvin Ridley. And without Calvin Ridley in 2022, he was wide receiver 18 in fantasy points per game. Last year, anytime he actually got the targets, so there's 9 games, he had at least 6 targets last season. He averaged 12.3 fantasy points per game, over nearly 80 receiving yards per game. I think he's going to easily get 6 targets per game in this offense. I actually think he's easily going to be the top targeted guy in this Jaguars offense, even though they added Brian Thomas Jr. and Gabe Davis. I think they're both more big play guys. It'll take Brian Thomas Jr. some time to really get going. I don't know. I just think Christian Kirk's incredibly, incredibly safe to draft. Not exciting at all, though.
Yeah, him and Trevor Lawrence have a sneaky good chemistry, and I think that's what threw Trevor Lawrence a lot last year. Fine. Evan Ingram picked up the slack in the middle of the field. But Christian Kirk, we saw the splash he made initially with Lawrence is pretty key. He gets open on the field. Again, a very good route runner inside. He's getting some experience on him as well, so he's got a little savvier with that. He's better than he was with the Cardinals at this stage and just in a more comfortable offense. And I think you'll see him be targeted quite a bit. I mean, they do have to sort out things with Gabe Davis because he's a big play threat, inconsistent. Brian Thomas is a rookie. They don't have a whole bunch else that they can look at. They also moved away from Zay Jones, right? Zay Jones was a little bit of a valuable guy on the outside for Trevor Lawrence as well. So a little bit of volatility with Thomas and Davis there. And Kirk is going to be that safe guy for Trevor Lawrence and throwing him in the middle of the field. And I mean, a lot of people run Evan Ingram quite a bit, but I think Ingram's production, a lot of it was tied to Kirk not being on the field. So if Kirk's on the field, a lot of those things that Ingram did last year in the middle of the field are going to go to Kirk in this offense. So wide receiver 31, it's a really good cost for someone who could easily end up leading his team in targets and receptions and in yards this season. I could really see that. Maybe the touchdowns won't be there for Christian Kirk, but we've also seen him used on some short passes in the red zone as well. So everything screams at wide receiver 31. Christian Kirk as the number 1 target for Lawrence for the Jaguars is good cost.
He could be a really, really great wide receiver too on your team, especially in half PPR leagues. Like if you have a guy with great upside in your wide receiver 1 spot, Kirk is that really solid wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 3 that you can get later on in your drafts. We're going to end today's show talking about the safest quarterbacks and tight ends that you can take in your fantasy drafts this season. We'll hit on 2 at each position. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Comparison is the thief of joy, and it's easy to envy other people's lives. Therapy can help you focus on what you want instead of what others have, so you can start living your best life. I have used online therapy over the last 3 years, and I cannot talk highly enough about it. It's helped me so much manage my just my emotions. It's helped me with my positive coping skills, how to set boundaries. It really has just empowered me to be the best version of myself that I can be. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. All you have to do is fill out a quick, brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you don't have to stress about who you get matched with and about liking them or not, because if it doesn't end up working out for you, you can switch therapists anytime for no additional cost. Stop comparing and start focusing with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. I want to thank everyone again for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. And I want to send a nice warm welcome again to any new listeners. We are so excited to have you. We are here 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, always trying to help you, be the best fantasy players that you can be. So let's dig in and finish this episode. Let's go with the safest quarterbacks to draft. Number 1, it's Lamar Jackson going as quarterback 4. You can get him in the 4th round. He finished as quarterback 3 in fantasy points per game last year. And I think most of us would say that wasn't even close to what his best year could have been, right? It was an up and down year, and he still finished as a quarterback 3 last year. And he's going at quarterback 4 cost now. So incredibly safe.
Yeah, I mean, Lamar Jackson, there's no variables. We know he's in the offense he loves. He's producing. He's the MVP for a reason. He put up different type of numbers than either the first time where he was getting it done, even not being a big red zone threat and scoring touchdowns. So that could also change in his favor. We talked about Derrick Henry scoring a lot of touchdowns, but in general, I think the Ravens are going to score a lot of touchdowns. There's going to be plenty to go around with Jackson and Henry. So, yeah, maybe this is just an offense, the safest offense. Just let's declare this the safest offense to draft players from. Even Zay Flowers, we like as a pretty good value pick. But yeah, we have Lamar Jackson at QB. I don't want to give away too much, but we have a double stack here for you to end it on the show. So his tight end is Mark Andrews. He's tight end 4. He's also very safe. That combination has been one of the safest when they're both on the field. Look, injury, durability, it comes up with all these guys. So let's just build that into their risk. But Lamar is pretty durable right now. Remember, his injury that was a couple years ago was fluky in the backfield. He wasn't hit. So Lamar is being managed well. He's throwing downfield. That's reducing his injuries. Maybe we'll take a couple less touchdowns, right, if he can not take a few extra hits and be on the field for us all season long. But the weapons are good. He's comfortable with them. Andrews and Isaiah Likely just all over the field. Lamar is in the zone. Again, not many dudes win 2 MVPs in this league, and he's one guy that has been short of the Hall of Fame. I mean, everyone else is in, or it's Patrick Mahomes, right? This guy is headed to another big season. Pretty safe at QB4. That said, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, maybe going to be hard to top those guys, but at QB4, I think you're going to get at least QB4.
Yeah, you get a bit of a discount on Allen and Hurts. With Allen, there's some risk there with his playmakers changing. Hurts is really safe as well, but if you get a whole round, basically a whole round discount from Hurts to Jackson, like Lamar Jackson, there was this worry that he might not rush as much this last year because they changed offensive coordinators. He rushed 148 times. He had 148 carries. Like, he's going to always have 140 plus carries every season. So safe when it comes to fantasy. And you brought up Mark Andrews, so we might as well just hit on our safest tight end, and then we'll get to our second safest quarterback and tight end, who also happen to be teammates after that. So you mentioned Mark Andrews is going as tight end 4, price 5th round. Andrews, tight end 4 last year in points per game. He played just 10 games. Tight end 3 in points per game in 2022. Tight end 1 in 2021. Tight end 4 in 2020. I mean, it's just every year he's a top 4 tight end. Last year, he had some huge weeks as well before his injury. He had 6 touchdowns from weeks 2 through 11 when he played last year. No one else on the Ravens even had more than 3. So he had double the touchdowns. Like, when it comes down to who he's around, Trey McBride's still young. Maybe he, doesn't come through on his cost. That's right above him. Dalton Kincaid is right behind Mark Andrews. He's much safer than taking a risk on Kincaid taking that next step forward. Travis Kelce's going a good 2 rounds ahead of him. And I think Andrews has just the same upside and is just as safe as Kelce is, but you get him 2 rounds cheaper.
Yeah, I was looking at 2 guys we've talked about a lot. If you're just joining us recently here, 2 guys we've talked about a lot that we like are Dalton Kincaid and Kyle Pitts. But I don't think we've talked enough about Mark Andrews on the show. And I think maybe the shiny new objects are Sam Laporta and Trey McBride. In the same vein, you have Travis Kelce and George Kittle's everywhere, right? He's a big personality, and he made a lot of big plays. He was great with Brock Purdy last year. So maybe those guys are kind of overshadowing the grand old producer here, Mark Andrews, and he's not that old. And keep in mind, this offense didn't add a wide receiver. They lost Odell Beckham Jr., so you're still battling with Nelson Aguilar and Rashad Bateman playing off Zay Flowers, probably because they know Mark Andrews is in the mix. He still held off Isaiah Likely. Isaiah Likely doesn't really see the field to catch passes unless Mark Andrews is hurt, like we've seen of late. So Andrews is special. He's a wide receiver hybrid again. He's probably headed to the Hall of Fame with Lamar. This is going to be one of the greatest combinations we're going to see in a while. Well, I'm not named Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce, but this is the other one you want to invest in, and they got to put up numbers, man. So the Ravens are in a great spot with these 2 guys, and Andrews is going to help Jackson. Jackson's going to help Andrews, and they're both going to be very safe this season.
Yeah, it's weird to have 3 players all safe on the same team, but those 3 can just dominate, and I don't think there's going to be very many there's not going to be fantasy points to go out around for really anybody else. It's going to be those 3 for the Ravens, and we love that, right? When it's condensed for a team, we love that. Now, the other pairing, the safest quarterback and tight end, it's Dak Prescott and Jake Ferguson at tight end. To start with Dak Prescott here, he's going as quarterback 9 in the 7th round. He has been a top 8 quarterback in points per game in 4 of the last 5 seasons. He's been a top 4 quarterback in points per game in 3 of the last 5 seasons, including last year when he was the quarterback 4 in points per game behind only Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, and Lamar Jackson. But he was quarterback 1 in points per game from week 6 through 18. That's when he really, he dominated during that span, just consistently winning weeks. And now all of a sudden he drops to quarterback 9 again because he's not fun or flashy. I don't know. He doesn't, get all the the rushing yards that maybe a Lamar Jackson or Anthony Richardson might give you. But he has the same offensive system with Mike McCarthy as he did last year when he dominated. Same players. They still don't really have any running backs to do anything on the ground. So, yeah, if you can get Dak Prescott in round 9 over, like we talked about CJ Stroud yesterday, going is the 50th overall pick, 24 picks before Dak Prescott on average, a good 2 rounds earlier than Dak. Like, I'm taking Dak 2 rounds later every time than Stroud.
Yeah, it's very funny. The Ravens and Cowboys are very much related. We had some variables last year because both teams were transitioning offenses away from Kellen Moore and Greg Roman, respectively. But Todd Monken and the combination of Mike McCarthy and Brian Schottenheimer turned out to be really good for these situations, especially in the passing game. So Dak Prescott, nothing's really changed. It's CeeDee Lamb. They're trying to pay him. But it's Brandon Cooks. They're still trying to figure out if they can find a third receiver. Michael Gallup is gone. We'll see if Jalen Tolbert does it. At tight end, we know Dalton Schultz is 2 years removed here, and Ferguson slid into his role pretty well last year. So he should have some scoring opportunities. They could also lose some there from the backfield because they're trying to figure out if Zeke still has something left with Rico Dowdle there. So maybe a few more short pop throws into the end zone to Ferguson, and then Prescott's going to have high volume. They really said they wanted to be a running team, but let's be honest. Their moves say they want to be a passing team. And I think that was kind of the confusion we had last year. Remember, it was the whole let Russ cook there with Brian Schottenheimer at the end. I think he's kind of changed to that. Is let Dak cook. That's what they're doing here. Just let him throw. He wants to throw. He wants to earn that big contract to make him the new highest paid quarterback in the NFL. He's got motivation there. So I think everything says Dak has another big year. And again, Dak is a really good regular season fantasy quarterback. Now, he's a little different from the guys we talked about, Patrick Mahomes, maybe being a better reality than fantasy quarterback at this point. I think Dak is a better fantasy quarterback than reality quarterback at this point. So roll with it. The Cowboys offense is still going to be very productive, and I don't think their defense is going to be good. So even more passing volume is going to probably come in some games for Dak. Again, he's going to chuck. He'll probably do a little bit on the ground to supplement that as well.
And with this passing offense being so heavy, that makes Jake Ferguson, who should very likely be the second target on this Cowboys offense behind only CeeDee Lamb, like that makes him a great safe pick. You can get him in the 7th round, sometimes even later, depending on how, tight end happy your league ends up being. But tight end 9, he's going. That's where he finished last year in both overall and points per game. That was his first season as a starter. That's also with him only scoring 5 receiving touchdowns. And that's like we saw his target share increase so much over the late part of the season. He averaged 8 targets per game over the last 7 games of the season, including the playoffs. He was only at 5 targets per game from weeks 1 through 12. So I do expect his target share to increase more. I do expect Ferguson to score more touchdowns this year because he had so many targets in the red zone, ranked 5th most targets in the red zone last year, tied with Amon-Ra St. Brown and DK Metcalf. Like we saw the touchdowns finally come his way in the playoffs. He scored 3 in the wild card game. Like the touchdowns should definitely come. I won't be surprised if he scores 8+ receiving touchdowns next year. And with him being the second target in this offense, that makes Jake Ferguson, I think, very, very safe in fantasy drafts going that late compared to, some others that are going much earlier and are a bit riskier.
Yeah, there's your safe stacks, by the way. That's combinations you can look for in the draft. And if you were looking at it, you would be looking at Lamar in the 4th, Dak in the 7th, or you could flip it and go Andrews in the 4th and Ferguson in the 7th. So you could do it somewhere in that combination. So maybe you can cross the stack a little bit if you need to and still get a safe player, even though it's not Lamar throwing to Mark Andrews or Dak throwing to Ferguson. You might be just fine with Dak and Andrews or Lamar and Ferguson. So there are a lot of ways to look at that on your team. But however you look at this combination, definitely a lot of safety there, quarterback and tight end.
Yep. Absolutely. That is it for today's episode. Thank you to you all for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. Every day, we will be here 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. And we're excited to talk to you tomorrow, talking about the biggest headlines in fantasy football. Don't miss it. Bye, y'all.
Cool.